Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Minnesota Matters. My name is Tess Rice. I'm MBA's General Counsel. Today I'm joined by Teresa Kuvas, our Senior Government Relations Manager, and Keith Johnson, Associate Counsel. Teresa's going to start it off today for us, talking about the elections and how those could impact the banking industry. And then we'll turn it over to Keith, and he's going to talk about some frequently asked questions that the legal department gets about deceased customers. Teresa?
Sounds great. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I'll give a brief overview of kind of some of the election stuff, kind of nationally, state, and kind of where we're going to go, but kind of really kind of push into kind of next year and what 2023 looks like. As many of you know, we kind of went into this election last week expecting a red wave, and that did not happen at all in the country, nor in the state. Just kind of nationally look at it. Right now, as it sits, the U.S. Senate is at a 50-49 breakdown, with the Democrats having 50 votes, with a runoff in Georgia. So that runoff will happen on December 6th. I believe right now there is probably the assumption that the Democrats will end up winning that seat. And if that is the case, that will give them the 51-49. If it ends up being 50-50, the Democrats still have control, with Vice President Harris having that deciding vote. So again, it will be Democratic control for the Senate. So nothing really changes with the makeup of the committees. Sherrod Brown will still remain the banking chair in DC. As for the U.S. House, as many of you may know, Congressman Tom Emmer from the 6th Congressional District has been running the House campaigns the last couple of years. And so there was a big expectation that there would be a lot, that they would take the majority. And just with midterm elections, there's always a big shift away from the president's party, but that again did not happen. Right now, as it's sits, and I was just looking at the numbers, Republicans have 217 seats to the Democrats 209. In order to have the majority, you need 218. So there's 9 seats outstanding. I was looking at the numbers, and about 4 of them are currently trending towards the Republicans, which would give them the majority, a very slim majority, but a majority nonetheless. All you need is 218. But what that means kind of for Minnesota, we still have a 4-4 split. Nothing changed when it came to our makeup. Down in the 1st Congressional District, Brad Finstead had his 4th election in 5-6 months. He had a primary in May, a general and primary in August, and then he won the actual November general for a 2-year term in last week. So he will be the congressman from the 1st Congressional District. But with the Republicans taking the majority in Congress, that kind of switches all of the committee structures around, committee chairs around, and we saw Congressman Tom Emmer win the whip position yesterday. So he will actually be number 3 behind the Speaker, the Majority Leader, and then the Republican whip will be the 3rd in line. What that means for the banking industry is it means we will lose him from the House Financial Services Committee, which is a huge loss for us. We have enjoyed having, for decades now, having somebody, regardless of party, on the House Financial Services Committee. And unless somebody else gets appointed to it, we might not have anybody on there for at least the next 2 years, and we'll see what happens after that. But we'll continue to watch that. We are very close with Congressman Emmer's office, so we'll be in touch with his office as well. So that's kind of some of the national stuff. Now to kind of look at Minnesota. There was not much change when it came to the constitutional offices. We assumed that Governor Walz would retain the governorship, and he did. AG, Secretary of State, Auditor, all stayed Democratic. We did think that there was a chance that the Republicans could, I think all the polls kind of showed that the Republicans could take the AG's seat, and the auditor being the closest. Ryan Wilson came within 8,645 votes or something like that. It was under 9,000 votes for the auditor's race. And Jim Schultz got within 20,000 votes of beating Keith Ellison for Attorney General. Hennepin County, definitely sways that if you can't get a good chunk of Hennepin County for the Republicans, it's going to be a tough time winning anything statewide because there is so much population within Hennepin County. So that the statewide elections definitely felt that Hennepin County population voting block. As for the legislature, as you may recall, we went into the legislature with a House Democratic control. They had a 70-64 majority, the DFL did. And then in the Senate, the Republicans had the majority, 34-31 with 2 independents. After the last election, it was 34-33 Republicans. Then Tom Bach and David Tomasoni switched to independents and caucused with the Republicans. So the Democrats only had 31. Redistricting back in February kind of threw a lot of wrenches into everybody's plans and the maps and everything. So there were open seats, there were pairings, and everything everybody was up for election this year. Again, Republicans believed they could hold the Senate, and the Republicans felt that there was a good chance of them winning the House as well. Whether a lot of people will look at the Supreme Court decision back months ago as being a catalyst for a lot of people getting out to vote, and that probably was the case. A lot of it also in Minnesota was candidate choice, what candidates were put up for on the ballot. And there was quite a few primaries in the Republican side back in August, and some of the more conservative Republicans ended up taking out some of the other people on the ballot. So last week we ended up with a flip of the Senate. So the Senate ended up flipping back to the DFL control, which I don't even know that the Democrats thought that they were going to win the Senate. So the Democrats will have control of the Minnesota Senate with a 34-33 majority. There were a handful of seats in greater Minnesota that the Republicans assumed that they were going to win. But again, candidate selection may have been the reason that some of those did not go the way that they wanted to. So there was at least 4 seats that were in contention, and they ended up not going the way that the Republicans thought that they would go. So the Democrats now have control of the majority in the Senate. As for the House, there is a Democratic controlled House as well. So that the numbers didn't change there. It's still 70-64, a couple seats flipped here and there. Again, there was a lot of open seats. There were two races where there was a combined current House Republican and current House Democrat paired together. And in that one, it ended up being in the Champlin-Coon Rapids area, Commerce Chair Zach Stevenson was paired with John Heinrich of the Republicans, and Stevenson won that one. And then on the Iron Range, Julie Stanstedt and Spencer Igo were paired in that one, and the Republican won up on the Iron Range. There are 2 current recounts going to happen up on the Iron Range. One of them was a Republican that took out Rob Eklund, and that is I think that recount is a 15 vote difference. And then another one where Natalie Zeltsikanar beat 46-year veteran Mary Murphy, and that one was a 35 vote win. So those 2 will be recounts, but unless those change, it'll still be a 70-64. Leadership is kind of now where we looked after the elections last week. The leadership they started having discussions last week. So we have a new majority leader in the Senate. That will be Carrie Dietzig. She is from Minneapolis. She has been in office now for 10 years. And we have a good relationship with Carrie, with Senator Dietzig. One thing I will note, and it kind of goes to some of the issues that we'll look at this session, is Senator Dietzig has been very focused on the racial disparities, and especially the racial disparities in home ownership. This is one that she has brought up to us multiple times. So this is one that we will be working with her. I believe it will still come up again this year. So it'll be one that we will definitely focus on seeing what's out there currently right now, is there anything that the banking industry can do to help in that regard? but so we will work with Senator Dietzich. Bobby Joe Champion will become the Senate president. He is also from the Minneapolis area. And then as for the Senate minority, they gave that to Mark Johnson, who was kind of the Thief River Falls way up north area. Jeremy Miller, who was the majority leader, chose not to run for minority leader. So we will have 3 new leaders there. We will have a complete changeover of committees and structures into the Senate. They will have to find chairs. We have been watching to see what they do with the Commerce chair. There's a possibility that the House and the Senate will line up their committees more closely this year. If you start looking at the Senate members from last year, there's not a whole lot of seniority. So there's going to be a lot more newer senators that could become chairs. And then in the House, Speaker Hortman will remain Speaker. Ryan Winkler did not run for re-election. And so Jamie Long, who is from Minneapolis, he will be the new majority leader. He was the energy chair last year, who we worked with on some green banking and other types of issues we worked with him in the past on. And then for minority leader, Kurt Doubt, who was minority leader and speaker, I'm not actually sure if he actually was in the running for minority leader or not this year. It will be Lisa Damath, who is from the St. Cloud area, and we've worked really well with her. And so we are excited about the new leadership in the House. We expect that Zach Stevenson will remain Commerce chair. We'll be meeting with his staff in the next couple of weeks, kind of figure out what their priorities are, whether they combine their committees, Commerce and Energy, because Jamie Long was the Energy chair. Zach Stevenson is very focused on energy as well. So that could be something that they combine. The elections resulted in over 55 brand new legislators. So that is 55 new legislators that we will be educating. I'm going to have Renee drop the link in for Bank Day at the Capitol, which is going to be on February 2nd. We would love to have everybody come to Bank Day. It's the long game. It's, meeting these people, meeting these new legislators. There's a lot from greater Minnesota, which we obviously need to educate, but we also have a lot of new metro and the metro kind of right around this ring that we really do need to focus on. And we need to tell the banking story, because again, if you go up to the Capitol, people have preconceived notions of what banking is, and your face to a name makes everybody, it makes the stories more real, instead of just using a broad brush to paint the banking industry in a particular light. As for topics that are going to come up this session, legalizing marijuana will 100% be one of the first issues that they're going to talk about. It's been something that's been on their agenda for the last couple of years. The MBA will just focus on making sure that they're aware that there continues to be difficulties with the banking of marijuana. We won't play a big role in whether it gets legalized or not. We just want to make sure that they are aware of the difficulty unless Congress changes something, and we're hoping that maybe Congress will change before the end of the lame duck session. Other issues, obviously, there could be up to a $12 billion surplus. Walz wants to send out the rebate checks. There wasn't a huge appetite even from the Democrats last year on sending out checks. With $12 billion, that's a lot of spending. Maybe they would want to focus on other areas versus just giving money to everybody. Education, funding it. Bonding bill would require the minority to have a say in bonding. Energy, climate, criminal reform, justice reform, employment. There will definitely be a lot done on employment this year. Paid and family medical leave will be on the agenda. So we will participate with other business trades on some of these other issues as we move forward. Specifically to banking, we could see payday lending, how that impacts us. We'll watch that. Financial literacy can go towards those racial disparity gaps. We'll talk about what banks are already doing and see if there's any way of helping to kind of look at some of the curriculum that's already in the school. As a parent of a middle schooler who is not the best with financial literacy, I think having them learn more in high school before they leave would be very beneficial. We expect the privacy will be back again next year as well. That one didn't get a lot of traction the last couple of years, but that is something I wouldn't be surprised if they look at crypto, whether it's more green bank stuff, it's all over the board. There's brand new legislators that have ideas. We'll definitely look at, see if there's anything on home ownership. So again, brand new legislators, we need everybody's help. If If you didn't see the political insight in the last 2 weeks, take a look. I believe it's still on the front page of the MBA's website. There's a link in there that has, in that political insight, it talks about all the brand new legislators. If you have contacts, if you have relationships with any of them, we would love to know, because that is incredibly helpful for us. We will watch in the next couple weeks as committee chairs come out, as committee structures come out. The governor will determine whether he keeps the same commissioners. We are hearing that one of the commissioners that wasn't confirmed in the past could possibly come back. With a DFL Senate, it's easier for him to get confirmations through. So we could see more changes there. We don't suspect much to change within the Department of Commerce, but that is some of what we are seeing. Again, we will give you more information as we hear things. Again, we've seen the trifecta in Minnesota before. 10 years ago, there was a complete DFL legislature, but it's a very different makeup these days. Back then we had Dan Sparks and Jim Metzen, who were more moderates and banking background, and that will definitely change this time around. So we will be working hard for the industry every day, every night, and anywhere in between. But we could definitely use your help as we move forward, because your connections make our job a little bit easier. So with that, I'll pass it back to Tess.
Thanks, Teresa. That was a great summary. Yeah, I think we expect to have a challenging time in this upcoming session. It was kind of luxurious having a divided legislature for us, because the things on the extreme would never pass. But here we are. So anyway, we will turn it over now to Keith Johnson, our Associate Counsel, to talk about some frequently asked questions regarding deceased customers. Keith?
Oh, thanks very much. Yep, this is always a good topic. I get so many questions from banks that have to deal with their dead customers and all the issues that come up with it. So I'm just going to fire through a lot of the questions that we have, and hopefully that'll take us to the end. But if there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. All right, so starting off, first question that I get a lot is, what does a bank do when they have an executor who comes into the bank and wants to open an estate account, and they just hand a banker a will to open up the account? And so banks wonder if this is enough to open an estate account. And the answer is no, that's insufficient. Banks never review a decedent's will. It's not the bank's job to review the will. And in fact, this is a good side note on a will. A will is not a decedent's will until that person is dead and someone has taken that document to the probate court, and the probate court says it is the decedent's will. Until that happens, it's just any other piece of paper, any other document. It just simply purports to be a will. So those are the two requirements that need to be met before it actually becomes somebody's will. And in this situation, so even if the executor did that, more accurately in Minnesota, an executor is referred to as a personal representative. So if they did actually go to the probate court and the probate court declare that it was the will, that's still insufficient, because the document the bank needs to get to open up an estate account is the court appointment naming that person as the personal representative. That's the document that's necessary. So even if the will is actually valid, the bank still does not review it. Next question that we get a lot is, what do they do with checks that are presented to the bank? So if a customer wrote a check before they died, the bank can pay it when it's presented for up to 10 days after they have died. That's in the UCC. After that, the bank would not pay it. And then I had one bank ask, well, what happens with checks that are deposited into the customer's account after they died? And I asked, how did that happen? Because the person's dead. So I don't know how that happened, but that is another issue entirely. So next one, similar to checks, ACH payments. Unlike a check, where it's actually written in the UCC that you can pay it for up to 10 days after death, the natural rules don't say that. So just as soon as a bank is made aware that somebody has died and they have a reasonable opportunity to act on returning an ACH debit, they should return that. And I believe the return reason code is R15. And the same is true for ACH credits as well that are going into an account. Most often banks will just return those as well for the same reason, that the account holder is dead. And that can actually create quite a big problem, specifically if the account holder who died was receiving Social Security benefits, because the last Social Security payment for the month in which they died has to be returned to Social Security Administration. And so if the funds aren't in that account and they paid them, the bank is liable for it. So those ones should be returned as well. And then it doesn't cause an issue for the bank later on if they have to deal with a reclamation request coming from whoever paid the account. Next big question that has to deal with authorized signers. So before I answer this question on whether or not an authorized signer can act on an account after the account holder died, an authorized signer is just a form of a principal agent relationship, just like with the power of attorney, just like with an employee of an employer. The person who is the authorized signer is the agent of the principal, and the principal is the account holder. So in all principal agency relationships, the death of the principal automatically revokes the agency relationship. So once the bank knows that the account holder is dead, that authorized signer has to be removed. They cannot access the account, can't sign checks, can't do anything. It happens immediately when the account holder is dead. That authorized signer ceases to have authority on the account. Next big question that I get is, what happens on corporations and LLCs when the sole owner of that business dies? And this is something we updated somewhat recently. I believe this past year, we updated this in our deposits manual. So there is a good discussion on this as well, but I still get a lot of questions on it. So it's good to review. So a high level overview of a business entity. A business entity like a corporation or an LLC is a completely separate legal person apart from its owner. It can hold assets, it can sue and be sued. They're basically two different people. There's XYZ Corporation and the owner. They are two totally different people. So from the bank's point of view, when the owner of a business has died, nothing has happened to the corporation or the LLC. The corporation or LLC lives forever until it is terminated. That's it. So it cannot die. It just exists. It doesn't live. It exists. And the authorized signers on an account for a corporation or an LLC, the authorized signers, if they're not dead, continue to have authority to act on the account. The only way to remove an authorized signer in this situation is the same way it's removed in any other situation. The bank has to get a resolution from that business entity removing them. It's the same with appointing a new one. They have to get a resolution to appoint a new authorized signer. So if there's an authorized signer, there's more than one, the sole owner perhaps of the business and their spouse or an employee or whoever it is, if that person's still living, they still have authority to act on the account, which is important for things like paying payroll and paying other costs of the business. However, this creates a huge issue for those really small businesses that have one authorized signer on the account, who happens to be the person that owns the account, and then is also the only person that's on the board of directors of the corporation. That creates a big problem. So this is something that banks might want to consider discussing with these small businesses, because when that person dies, there's nobody on the board, so nobody can issue a resolution. So there can be no new authorized signers. And assuming that there's no other estate planning that's going on, the default in this situation is that the personal representative, or rather the person who's going to go to probate court to become the personal representative, would exercise voting power over the shares that are in the estate to appoint somebody to the board of directors, and then, which might be that personal representative, and then that person issues a resolution. So when somebody dies and they need to have payroll that goes out every couple of weeks, this is usually something that is a really pressing concern, and they need to figure it out. But again, from the bank's perspective, since nothing has happened to its customer, and you have somebody who comes in and says, how do I add an authorized signer? You tell them the exact same thing you would tell them in any other business entity, that you need a resolution. It's up to them to figure it out about how they're going to go about and do that, because the bank is not an attorney. The bank is not acting as counsel for that person. You don't tell them the exact steps that they need to do to accomplish this. You just tell them that the document that you need to get, which is a resolution, and then they figure it out. So that's just an important consideration that people need to remember. One flip side for a different type of business entity, though, is a sole proprietorship. So unlike a corporation or LLC where you actually create legal personhood in that business entity, a sole proprietorship is literally the owner. They are the exact same person. So that business entity does die immediately when the owner dies. They're the same person. So authorized signers cease to have authority on those accounts when the business owner dies. All right, next issues, lots of issues
Hey,
that,
Keith,
yeah.
we do have some questions that have
Oh,
poured
all
in
right,
for
good,
you.
because I don't even have that screen up, so I can't even see the questions that are coming through.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, all right.
So the question is, Keith, what about living trusts? If the accounts are held in a living trust, can the beneficiaries of that trust write checks, say for funeral costs?
Yeah, good question. No, beneficiaries never have authority to actually access the assets of a trust. Only the trustee has authority to access a trust. There are a lot of times in living trusts where the person who created it is the settler. They gave the assets to the trust of the trustee, and they're the beneficiary. I mean, they're accessing it, but that's because they're the trustee. But if it's a daughter or a son of whoever created the trust and their dad died and he was the trustee, they can't just go in and start writing checks. It's the trustee who has to have that power to do that.
So that's often done right through, there'll be a successor trustee named in the
Yes.
trust, hopefully, and they
Yes,
would come
hopefully,
in.
hopefully there's a successor trustee. The trust will outline oftentimes how they take over as trustee. I mean, it's usually pretty simple. And then they'll just come into the bank, give the bank a certificate of trust saying, all of these things have happened that make me the trustee. I have the power to do this. And then the bank acts like any other trustee coming over.
And that's a good point to bring up, is the certificate of trust, because a lot of bankers think they're responsible to read a trust. They'll
Yes.
require the full trust document.
Yes, so this is also a good point that goes along with the wills. Banks don't review trust documents, just like they don't review wills. It's not your job. All you need to have is a certificate of trust in order to open a trust account, in order to let the trustee act on the trust account. You do not want to know what is in the trust, just like you don't want to know what's in the will, because you don't want to be liable for allowing somebody to do something they had no power to do. So you just kind of want to be ignorant of that. But it's not the bank's job to review the actual trust document.
And that certificate of trust statute in Minnesota has protections for banks. So if you follow what's in there, you're protected from liability.
Right. So as long as the certificate of trust is properly filled out, and it's very short, it only needs a few things. As long as it's properly filled out, a bank's protected from liability for doing what the trustee said that they had the power to do. So there's no liability for the bank.
Yeah, so it's way easier, and it also protects you. So that's good. We have a couple questions that are kind of tied together regarding ACH payments that come through. I know you addressed that briefly. The question is, we know to return Social Security benefits timely, but we've been warned against stopping other ACH debits that could possibly be a house payment or an electric bill that could cause problems if they do not continue to be paid.
Yeah, they could cause a problem, which is why somebody needs to go and become a personal representative and actually have the power to handle that, because that's all with the estate. So a personal representative needs to actually go to probate court, become appointed, open an estate account, and manage that sort of those sort of costs and debts of the estate.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be an immediate concern. Obviously, foreclosure takes a very long time in Minnesota.
Right.
And then they're not going to cut your electricity the first month it's not paid.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So hopefully it's not such a big deal. And yeah, the second question was just, should we shut off automatic loan payments when someone passes away?
Again, it's the authority to make that payment depends on the account holder being alive. So if they are no longer alive, usually the authority to make that payment has ended. So banks pretty much just freeze the account until somebody comes and handles it after that.
Okay, sounds good. Do you have one more quick issue? We have a couple minutes.
I have several quick issues. Let me think. So how much more time do we have?
Just like a minute.
Oh God. Oh, okay. All right. I have one that I get all the time. Somebody comes to the bank and they try to give the bank a small estate affidavit to deposit a check made out to the deceased person or the deceased person's estate, however it's written. And they say, I can use this affidavit to deposit this check. That is completely incorrect. The affidavit for a small estate is used by that person to go to whoever wrote the check to say, write the check to me instead. It's not to take it to your bank to deposit the check. So and there's been attorneys who have had this question come up a lot and have told the bank that their client can deposit the check using this. This is completely false. The statute itself says that the person indebted to the decedent or who has possession of assets of the decedent can pay out those assets or deliver money or anything to a person who uses a small estate. If they just come forward with a check, the bank doesn't have that money. So if it's a life insurance policy that comes from the life insurance company and it's drawn on Chase Bank and you go to Wells Fargo and use an affidavit to try to deposit it, how is Wells Fargo indebted to the decedent? It doesn't make any sense. So they would have to go to that insurance company to use that affidavit. This could be different if the check maybe was drawn on the bank. I mean, in that situation, the person who had the account at that bank was indebted to the decedent, and then the bank is, indebted to that account holder. There it might work. But usually when they're just trying to deposit a check made out to that estate using it, that's not how it works.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that does come up a lot. We could probably talk about this stuff all day, but we
Yeah.
won't. Just want to remind you again about Bank Day. We'd really appreciate you participating in that. We really need the help with all the new legislators. And then Renee posted also that there's a class on death in the bank account at our office on May 9th. So if you're interested in getting into some more of these issues, they will definitely be doing it at that class. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you have a great day. Bye.